Thank you very much for allowing me to visit with you in this capacity as a virtual participant in your 59th session of the Progressive Baptist Association. As many of you know, I'm the son of a fundamentalist minister. When I was growing up, my father and I used to discuss often his wishes for me to follow him into the ministry. I tell people all the time that I really thought that's exactly what I was going to do. And when I went away to South Carolina State, my idea was to spend 4 years on that campus and then go to a seminary and follow my father into the ministry. But it just so happens I graduated high school in the late 50s and was on South Carolina State's campus in 1960 when those four students sat in up in Greensboro, North Carolina on February 1, 1960, and launched what became known as the sit-in movement or the student movement. I always call it the civil rights movement of the 60s. We followed them in Orangeburg 2 weeks later, only to get downtown and find out that they had removed all the tops from the stools. And that was not going to be a comfortable sit down. So we went back to the campus and we organized, and South Carolina State students and Claflin students, and over 2,000 of us went back downtown Orangeburg on March 15th, 1960. I was arrested on that day, spent all day in jail. And late in the evening, I was visited by a group of students bringing food for all of us. One among them was a little 92-pounder from Moncks Corner, South Carolina. I didn't know her at the time. She came toward me with a hamburger in her hands. I reached for it. She pulled it back, broke it in half, gave me half of the hamburgers. She ate the other half. I was so grateful for that half hamburger. I married her 18 months later. So I'll tell everybody I got a lot out of going to jail on March 15, 1960. But that experience and walking back to the campus with her that evening told me that maybe the seminary wasn't where I should go. And so I went home to tell my dad that I had decided against going to the seminary. I thought he was going to be disappointed, and maybe he was. But he said to me on that occasion, "Well, son," he said, "I suspect the world would much rather see a sermon than to hear one." I internalized that. I took that as my mantra. And I have tried to work in all the capacities I've served, and even more so here in the United States Congress, for the world to see in my service a good, productive sermon. And of course, along the way, back in 1960, I met my wife in March. Later that year, in October, on the campus of Morehouse College, where we went to form the second meeting of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and to organize so that we could take our efforts, make them more efficient, more effective. And while in that meeting, I met John Lewis. Also on that evening, I met Martin Luther King Jr. and went into a meeting with him around 10 o'clock in the evening for what was supposed to be a 1 hour meeting. It turned out to be almost 5 hours. It was nearly 4 o'clock the next morning before we emerged from that meeting. I always call that meeting my Saul to Paul transformation, because I came out of that meeting not the same person that I was when I went in. And so, although I did not follow my father into the ministry, I have worked hard to fulfill two of my favorite scriptures. First one being Michael 6:8. I'm sure all of you are familiar with. For he's shown the old man that which is required. do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. And as I've carried out my work, especially the work we were doing back in the 60s, I developed a love for another passage of scripture found in the New Testament, Hebrews, the first 11th chapter, in the first verse. And there we find the definition of faith. The faith we had in each other, the faith we had that what we were doing was the right thing to do, the faith I still hold, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. I still hold on to that faith for this great country. I have faith that each and every one of us will do what is necessary to make sure that John Lewis's efforts on that Edmund Pettus Bridge, that the Supreme Court has moved to neuter, that those efforts will not be in vain. I have faith that each and every one of us, irrespective of our denominations, Baptists, all Baptists, progressives, national, American, whatever Baptists, all Methodists, all fundamentalists, Kojic, whatever your faith may be, I would hope that we will work together this year to make this a good, productive election. We don't have to ask what is needed. All we've got to do is listen. We have a president who is making it very clear that the Affordable Care Act ought to be taken off the books. Not because of what it does. He benefits from it like everybody else. But he wants it off the books because the author of that act, the proponent of it, was the first African-American president of these United States. He is working hard every day to eliminate from this governmental process anything that Barack Obama ever proposed or ever was turned into law. That's what this is all about, and we know it. And we will be complicit if we fail to do our part to get rid of this effort in the White House. And so I'm here today to say that we must dedicate ourselves. And I've been calling upon every denomination, every congregation to adopt a precinct, whatever precinct your parish may be situated in, or every precinct where you have parishioners living. Just decide now that I'm going to get the list of every voter in this precinct, and I'm going to make sure that every one of them vote on election day. My dad used to keep 3 books in the pulpit with him. One was the Bible, one was the hymnal, and he couldn't sing very well. But the third was a book that he put together of a list of every registered voter in our precinct. And he did his part from the pulpit, among the congregations, out in the community, whatever was required to get those people to the polls on election day. I grew up with that. But not just our faith group. Many of us are members of Masonic groups. I, like many of you, am a 33rd degree Mason. Still financially active in Nehemiah number 51 down in Charleston and the George Washington Carver consistory number 162. And I believe very strongly in the Masonic Brotherhood. I'm asking every lodge to adopt a precinct and make sure that everybody in that precinct votes. Like many of you, I'm the member of a fraternity. I'm an Omega, some of you are Alpha, some are Kappas, some are Sigmas, and many of you are members of a sorority. aka Delta, Zeta, whatever you may be, Sigma, Gamma, Rho, it does not matter. Every sorority, every fraternity needs to adopt a precinct and work between now and November 3rd to get everybody in the precinct to vote on election day. I know you've heard as often as I've heard it, that we ought to make sure that this society that we are growing up in is made a more perfect union. Many of you have looked at coins and other parts of money, and you see a little phrase on it's called e pluribus unum. Translation: out of many, one. My friend John Lewis used to say all the time, we are one family. We all live in the same house. And we, as one family, living in the same house, must take to heart what this year is all about. People often say that this is the most important election ever. Well, I won't say that, because every election is important. But I will say this: this will be the most consequential election since 1860. I feel that very strongly. I've studied election after election after election. And I believe this will be the most consequential election for people of color since the election of Abraham Lincoln. And if we fail to get the right result this year, we will see the clock turn back on all that we've sacrificed for over the years. And so I want to close my comments here to you today invoking the thoughts of a great writer who, a Frenchman who came to this country back in the 1830s. He came to this country to study our penal system. And he detected what he said was a certain magic about the country. And he sat down after traveling around and looking at the various institutions in this country. He sat down to write about it. He wrote a 2-volume book called Democracy in America. And that 2-volume book, to me, can be summed up in one sentence. And that sentence is this: America is not great because it is more enlightened than any other nation, but rather because it has always been able to repair its faults. COVID-19 has revealed a fault in our healthcare system. We must vote this year to repair that fault. COVID-19 has revealed a fault in our educational system, and we must work this year to make online learning possible for all our children and telehealth possible for all our citizens. Broadband deployment has got to be, in my opinion, the thing that all of us should dedicate ourselves to. So I'm closing by reciting the testimony, a testimony that I often recite because it's so insightful. It was given by a rural Tennessee farmer who stood up in church back in the 1940s, around the time that this country was celebrating the 50th anniversary of rural electrification. He stood up in church and he said to all those gathered, brothers and sisters, I want to tell you something. The greatest thing on earth is to have the love of God in your heart. And the next greatest thing is to have electricity in your house. Well, I sincerely believe that that was a great summation of what electricity meant in the 20th century. To me, here in the 21st century, the next greatest thing is to have broadband in every home. Just think of what your church services would be like if every one of your parishioners had broadband while you had virtual services. You'll be much more effective, you'll be much more efficient, and much more equity will have been meted out to your congregations. So that's what this election is all about. Electing someone who will commit himself. There's going to be one of two people sworn in come January. And we've got to decide which one you're going to live with for the next 4 years. And so thank you for what you're doing. And just remember, as much as you may preach about the Almighty, we're going to be making a choice of presidents in a few months. Let's not compare our choice with the Almighty. Compare your choice to the alternative and make that your mission between now and November 3rd. Thank you, and Godspeed to each and every one of you.